allow your idea to be destroyed. A lot of people don't like that, or if they have people that they would class as overly negative, they don't like to work with them. Whereas for me, I find people that interrogate ideas in that way super valuable, because they're the ones that ask you the real question, which is, do you believe in what you've said? Do you really? Because I think it sucks because of this, or I don't think it'll work because of that. And that's how you really discover, oh, shucks, have I actually thought about this? Or did I just race to the end and think I'm right? So for me, I need people like that. They're the ones that are really helping you sharpen the idea.
How willing are you to let your ideas be destroyed? For most of us, that's a scary concept because we can equate good ideas with being worthy. But what if your worth comes from being a learner and not being perfect? In this messy and complex world where the old structures and systems of society and work are found wanting, we need to evolve and adopt new ideas fast. My guest today exemplifies an approach to life and leadership that is all about this, blending curiosity, humility and integrity into a potent package with plenty of practical wisdom for all of us. Hi, I'm Digby Scott and this is Dig Deeper, a podcast where I have conversations with depth that will change the way you lead. My guest today is CO2 Rob Pa'ol. Rob's heritage, his whakapapa, is Samoan. He's a first-generation immigrant to New Zealand and was brought up in the predominantly white city of Christchurch. And growing up in this environment as someone who didn't necessarily look like most other people there strongly shaped how Rob made sense of who he is, which I'm sure we'll get into. Rob and I first met when he was a participant on an emerging senior leader program for one of New Zealand's public sector agencies. And back then, he struck me as someone who has a strong sense of who he is, yet with a deep curiosity to keep learning and growing. And when I sit down with Rob, I feel seen, I feel heard, and I feel invited to be bigger. It's a powerful experience. And I'd say that Rob continues to emerge as a senior leader, and his influence and impact has certainly grown since I first met him. Rob, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Kia ora, talofa lava. Thank you very much for the invitation. Look forward to yet another one of our chats.
This is one where we press record rather than not, and hopefully there's a lot of gold that comes out for everyone listening. I want to start with your name.
Right.
Like mine, like Digby's not a name that you hear very often, and neither is CO2. Can you just shed some light on where that comes from, what that's about?
Yeah, sure. My mother's family, they have a little ritual or a practice of giving their eldest child or eldest boy a unique name. My mother came here in search of a new life, etc., was at school, going to night school, and she was doing classes, and she's doing some sciences, and she was pregnant, and she, looked around at some of the stuff around the science class, I guess, and thought, oh yeah, maybe some of the stuff on the tables could be a good name for my son. It was either acid, neon, or CO2. So I think I did all right, to be
You did all right. At least it wasn't H2SO4 or one of those more complicated.
It would just be H, wouldn't it, if it was that?
And has it ever sort of had a spin-off? Do you, make jokes of it, or does it do you have a play with it every now and then?
I don't know about me. I think growing up, kids love to have fun with it. So it was the age of Star Wars, so I got the R2-D2s, the C-3POs, all that kind of stuff. It gets shorter in my circle the longer you know me. My really close friends call me C.
Right.
People that kind of know me call me CO. No one calls me CO2, like in full, unless they're trying to make a joke or something. But
that's interesting. I met your wife for the first time the other night, and she referred to you as CO. So she's not in that really in a circle where it's C, or maybe that's just not the public version.
She was talking to you, remember?
True, right? Yeah, so she had to have a little bit of distance. Yeah, awesome. Eh? Yeah, no, it's funny, right? Yeah, as a kid you get that teasing. I have two middle names, and the second one of those is Purdom. My full name's Digby Ross Purdom Scott, and that goes way back to like the 1500s or something when a Robert Scott married a Mary Purdom, and it kind of carried on. And the eldest child always had Purdom somewhere in their name. And I got ruthlessly teased for that weird name, let alone having Digby. So at least we bond around this stuff, eh? So, when I first met you, though, you didn't call yourself CO or CO2. It was Rob.
Yeah, that's right. And my job, working with individuals that are quite risky, it was kind of really at the time that the internet, social media, etc., were really taking off. And I realized, looking at all my profiles, I was like, shucks, I'm a pretty easy guy to find. So I just started using my middle name at work, and it just kind of stuck since then. But recently, it feels like it's the right time. I'm not really in that type of work or exposed to that type of risk anymore. So it feels like using my actual name is probably what I should start doing at work, as well as in my real life.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering whether there's just a more of an owning of it too. You get to a certain point in life where it's like, this is who I am. This is my name.
That's a really good point as well. Yes. Maybe not quite as articulate as you're putting it. I think it's more of it's been more of a quite a stark, who is this Rob guy? It's like you go home, you're with your cousins, you're with your aunties, like no one calls you that. You kind of yeah, okay. It's probably about the right time to get back into it.
That's opening up a lovely door. Who is this Rob guy? Who is this Rob guy? It's a big question, right? You just mentioned your work, and for anyone listening, how would you describe what your work is?
My work is supporting developing countries in the Pacific, in a particular area of expertise, I guess is what I do. So, you recruit people in New Zealand within our organisation, you put them together in a team, and then you travel to the Pacific and you help Pacific nations. That's the core of my job.
I want to dig into that, hey, what that purpose is about. Before we go there, I reckon it'd be get into the time machine and go back to your more formative years when you were being brought up in Christchurch. And before we recorded, we were exploring what shapes identity. We had that conversation. And how do you make sense of who you are when you're in a place where you don't necessarily look like everyone else? How did you make sense of who you are?
For me, it's a continual thing. It doesn't mean you're always changing. Like if you have coins and you stack them on top of each other, if you think about yourself in that way, the coin at the top is the coin at the bottom. It's all connected. It's not like you leave a state of being behind. It's just sometimes you need a bit of help to remember. I think in terms of the early years in Christchurch, I think a lot of immigrants will say this, or children of immigrant families, there's quite a stark difference between being in our house and being outside our house. In our house was completely Samoan. Samoan's like family structure, Samoan values. Parents spoke Samoan all the time. There's lots of rules and traditions that kind of transfer from the islands into that house. So in this house, you're like, yep, I'm a Samoan person. I know what's going on. This is how we do stuff. And then you go out into the world where people don't think like that. Not all people think like that. Not all people act like that. I think the first thing is you see it doesn't reflect you at all. I think that's the first thing you notice. It's kind of, okay, the world is not Samoan. Okay, that's fine. Mm-hmm. And then there's a continual kind of exploration of, first of all, like what is this world and how does it work? So what are the rules? How do people interact? How do parents talk to children? How do you talk to teachers? How do you talk to people older than you? All those things are quite set in Samoa, in Samoan culture. And you're trying to figure out how do people interact and move in this world, the outside world.
Yeah, what are the rules?
Yeah. What are the rules? And people might have heard this before, and let's just be clear, the outside world, that makes it sound bad. It's not like that. It's just, they're quite distinct experiences.
That's quite a stark distinction between the rules inside the house and the rules outside, if you like. I remember as a kid, around the age of about 11 or 12, I was brought up in this idyllic country town on the coast down the southwest of Western Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And as a young teenager, I went to boarding school in the big smoke of Perth, and not quite ripped out of the idyllic place, but definitely a thrust into a world where it felt far more sophisticated, different ways of relating, different sets of values, and having to feel my way. And that kind of sense-making of what are the rules, but all the sense-making of, and who am I in this context, I reckon that took me years, particularly at that kind of really formative age of 12, 13 sort of stuff.
Yeah, that feels very similar. So in Samoan culture, there's a word for the space between people, and it's called va. Va means space. And, there are rules around how you engage with someone depending on who they are. And based on who they are, specific things are put in the va, right? Whether it's respect, whether it's cordiality, whether it's instruction, whether it's authority. Depending on who they are and your relationship to them, particular things need to go into the space to make it work. So it's quite a prescribed way of engaging with people, and it's got complex structure of how communities engage with each other. When you kind of engaging in Christchurch society in the 80s, there's no real consistent structure like that unless you're in something quite regimented. Like say if you're in a boarding school, or say if you're in a church, or say if you're in some sort of military outfit, where there's a very clear structure and there's very clear way to behave and engage with others. The free-for-all of just regular day-to-day living, that took a while to figure out.
Makes me think of the role of rules, and it makes me wonder whether in our Western individualistic culture that perhaps we're missing a trick around those ways of engaging. Is it a little bit more like, well, we'll make them up depending on how we feel? Whereas what I'm hearing with your upbringing, that was almost like there's a handbook, right? This is how you show up.
Yeah, definitely.
And have we thrown out the handbook? And maybe I'm being a bit extreme, but what are we missing here? And what's the upside? What's the opportunity by having more prescription of how to relate?
Yeah, I don't know if it's prescription or whether it's maybe remembering why things are done. Like, for example, I was listening to some podcast a few months ago, and I remember someone talking about Sunday dinner, English Sunday dinner, right? And talking about how in its earlier iterations, like Sunday dinner was quite purposeful. It was a place for people to come together to talk about the week, to talk about their plans. They wouldn't have called it reconnecting, but that's what they were doing. And over time, my understanding is it's just turned into Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
But if you remember what it's for and you keep that as a tradition, then maybe it stops being just this, I feel like roast, you race to Sunday dinner. It's like, that's where family gets together. That's where I make sure we're still all tight. That's where I make sure I know what's going on with everybody. That's
the purpose. It's kind of like if you look at Christmas, you think about Easter, and it's now all about chocolate. We've lost, in many ways, the real underlying reason for these ceremonies, these rituals, right? And I love that. I love the remember the purpose. Can you tell us a little bit about that juxtaposition between the inside of the house and the outside world, and your exploration and being in these two worlds and having to navigate? How do you reckon that shaped you, and how does that carry forward today?
I think it just began with things I started to notice. For example, I noticed there were no Samoan people on billboards. I noticed there were no Samoan people on telly, and there were no Samoan people singing songs, and there were no Samoan people in booklets or pamphlets. There were no stories about Samoan people. You're kind of moving around in this space in the 80s. And everything I'm noticing is telling me either A, you don't belong there, or B, which is the thing that I probably took notice of the most. If there is success in this place, it's definitely not for you. Based on how ideas of success were transmitted, whether it's in a program, whether it's on a billboard, whether it's in a pamphlet, whether, like when you talk about go on holiday. Oh, this is cool. Flick through it. Well, no Samoan people go on holiday, right? And this is me I'm talking about, I'm not saying that was the purpose of it, but the more I moved through the world and looked at it, the less of myself I saw in it. And I think that really stuck with me. I think it makes you do a number of things. You adapt a bit. You kind of learn some of these practices and you go, oh, okay, is this how they talk? Okay, well, I'm going to start learning how to do that. These are things that are important to, European people living in Christchurch in the 80s. Okay, I've got to be aware of that. Even with things like how you're perceived by people and how that can have a negative impact on you. Like I always used to take a book onto the bus and I'd read it. And I'd read it in a place that everyone saw that I was reading it, I also loved to read, by the way, which was helpful. But that was something that I found I really wanted to battle against. And rightly or wrongly, with my approach, was don't judge me just because of how I'm looking, like we do read, we do study, we do other things.
Right. So the signal was, I'm like you, don't put me in a lower kind of rung.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't put me in a box or judge me before, you talk to me. That was quite a calculated thing for me. And also just for safety, like I didn't want people to think that I was a threat or anything.
Yeah, so there was a fitting in to be safe bit, but there was a larger driver, which was a signaling around the don't box me in.
Yeah.
And claiming some ground. This is me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've gotten older, we'll probably get onto this later. It's gone from signaling to complaining to actively participating in changing it. That perception is a big thing for me. Perhaps, people could see that that's a superficial thing, but that's how people know where they're going, whether they're safe, their first impression of you, that stuff's all important, and you can't have the door shut before you get there.
Yeah. You said signaling to complaining to being actively involved, essentially. Can you tell us a little bit about the complaining phase of Rob Paol's life?
Yeah, I think with that first phase of just absorbing what the world is through my experience, right? And then getting to a point where, how come we aren't in pamphlets? How come people don't write stories about us? I remember in uni in Canterbury, I was doing arts and there was a scholarship available. And for a Pacific student, I was like stoked. I was like, yeah, I'll apply for that. And I was reading through the requirements and it was noting that if you were to be successful in receiving the scholarship, you could only do Pacific art. And I remember being super pissed off with that. I remember just thinking, I thought you're sponsoring me.
Yeah.
What if I want to make a sci-fi film or something, or lithography or something? What if I want to be, I want to paint in oils or work in digital media? I just remember being very upset about yet again our box for me. I was like, you can't do that, can you?
What comes up for me is the image of a channel dug in the ground for the water to flow in a certain direction. This is your channel.
Yeah.
This is where you're going. I'm not surprised you complain. I think that's very justified.
Yeah. And I think if I'm generous about it, of course, culture is important. And of course, our culture is important to us as Pacific people. But, if you want to talk about a diverse group of people, the people of the Pacific are about as diverse as it gets. Sure, some of us will get a scholarship like that and not even think about doing anything other than Pacific art. But for me, being a Pacific person doing any of that, I'm still Pacific. And that's still a message.
Yeah.
You know, that's still, yep, you can be a Pacific person and do any of this stuff. You don't have to just flow down this channel where your water is going.
It's an and, not an or, right? There's Pacific person as a part of your identity, but that's not where the channel stops. It's a much broader territory you want to be playing in. And you happen to be Pacific.
Yeah, that's it.
How has that and story played out in your career, or maybe in your life? Like this, it's kind of like, don't box me in, don't channel me that way. I've got a lot to contribute here. Let me explore where that contribution is best serving. It's a sense I get of you. How has that shown up, played out into adult life?
I have thought about that a couple of times. I don't know whether my wide range of interests is because I'm genuinely curious, which I believe it is, or whether it's some sort of rebellion against what I'm meant to do. Like I don't quite. I think it's chicken and egg. You know, like I remember being 12 to 15, that age, and really falling in love with heavy metal.
Awesome!
Like really, really loving it.
What were you into?
I was into Anthrax, Metallica. I was into all sorts of rock as well. To be honest, I was into Dire Straits. Like I liked loads of music, to be fair, but I really fell in love with metal. You know, I started growing my hair long and stuff, and I remember one Sunday we were going to church, and I remember I wanted to wear my Metallica t-shirt to church, and I asked Mum, and she let me. And I remember just feeling so proud to be her son that day. You know, I was just like,
oh, yeah.
I was like, yeah, Mum. It's like, that's right. You know, and I'm walking around with these frickin' skulls all over my t-shirt, you know. Like, but like I said, I think it's probably a mixture of both from any time. But, you know, if I really don't like something, it's hard for me to get into it. I'm not someone that just rebels because the rebelling is the aim. Yeah, it has to have some sort of purpose or benefit for me.
The word that comes up for me isn't rebel. It's something like constructive challenger. You know, that's 2 words. But
oh, that would have been useful to tell Mum. I remember that. If anyone's watching this and you want an alternative to rebellion, there you go.
Constructive challenger. Because I think that's what I've noticed you do, you know, in our interactions and what I've seen of you, that you'll offer an alternative frame and you'll just gently and quietly, and maybe you do it loudly too, but you'll just invite people to stop in their tracks and go, here's another way of thinking about that. Or here's how that's limited or something. And, you know, that's the constructive challenger, I reckon. Yet, I don't think that's at odds with the curiosity part, right? Because you seem to, you know, I think of it as almost like a yin and yang circle here, right? There's this challenge bit of, hey, stop and think. Yet there's this invitation to learn, and you want to learn and understand as well. And I love that combo, right? It's, you know, there's a book I read years ago called Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart. And it's sort of similar, like there's this backbone challenge, yet there's a lot of heart that you bring. I'm putting it out there as an observation. I'm not quite sure where we could take that, but I'm wondering, how does that sit with you as part of your identity?
I think you hit the nail on the head at the end there. You know, don't know where to go with this. I think that's, no, the purpose of asking or offering a frame is not that I know the answer. It's that whatever's been offered sounds incomplete. I don't think we're quite there. I don't know what it is, but maybe if we think about it like this, we may be able to work around what we have on the table. I really love to collaborate with people. I like not knowing the answer. I like the exploration of it. And I think when you work that way, it doesn't become, I'm talking about working through things, like that process doesn't become adversarial. It's not this or that or this or that. It's like, could be bits of this, could be bits of that, you know, like, and pitching it in a way where people don't take whatever has been talked about previously off the table, I think is a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's the and, right? Again, it's not it's this or that. It's there's this bit and there's this bit and there's probably other bits we haven't even seen yet.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm curious about that. You like not knowing the answer, which is, I think, awesome. What's it like, and maybe you have a story, around working with people who are driving for the answer? Because, oftentimes cultures value that, workplace cultures value, we need the answer. We need it tomorrow because the minister's asking for it or something, right?
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
I think there are situations for that situation or scenario you described before. Sometimes the answer is the answer. How many people have done this? Okay, yep, we know that. How many people have done that? How many accidents happened here? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that definitive
the
stuff.
definitive stuff. Yeah, of course. There's a time and place for that. But when groups get together and they're trying to think about something new, I always find it quite fascinating if someone somehow knows the answer already. Like internally, I'm like, how can you know the answer already? Like, this thing is new. We're walking a new path. And to me, if you think in that way, whether you're doing like fact checking or complex problem solving, in the complex problem solving part, I mean, sure, you can provide a level of assurance to people because, of course, you're going to do the thing that you said you're going to do at every step of the plan that you wrote. But for me, developing new things is about exploration. And sometimes the answer, you won't even know it, but you won't find it if you think you know what the answer is. For me, it's about how can you interrogate a situation or scenario with enough curiosity and intent so that the truth reveals itself, which is really what you're trying to get. Yeah. Well, what is the answer? Not my answer, not Dave's answer, not Polly's answer. Like, what is the answer to this? And we need everyone pitching in on that.
I love that. So that the truth reveals itself. It reminds me of a quote I heard from the professional poker player Annie Duke. And it's something along the lines, I'll probably make a hash of it, but don't seek to be right, seek to be accurate. And
that's good.
I love that, right? It's, if you're making an assertion, you better have the facts to back up that assertion. If you're saying it's the truth, well, can you just explain that and explain how you came to that? Critical thinking, really. And I love that seek to be accurate because that is the search for the truth. But you've got to do it through a lens of accuracy, not assumption.
Yes. Allow your idea to be destroyed. A lot of people don't like that, or if they have people that they would class as overly negative, they don't like to work with them. Whereas for me, I find people that interrogate ideas in that way super valuable because they're the ones that ask you the real question, which is, do you believe in what you've said? Do you really? Because I think it sucks because of this, or I don't think it'll work because of that. And that's how you really discover, oh, shucks, have I actually thought about this? Or did I just race to the end and think I'm right? So for me, I need people like that. They're the ones that really helping you sharpen the idea.
You stopped me in my tracks when you said allow your idea to be destroyed. It getting me thinking that I think a lot of people hold very tightly to their ideas for whatever reason, as an identity thing or the need to be right, whatever it is. What is it that you reckon has shaped you or caused you to be way more, it's kind of like hold it tightly with an open palm. You might believe in it, but you're willing for it to be destroyed. What are the shaping forces that have caused you to be that way? Because I think it's a rare thing.
When I talked about growing up, that would have helped, this idea of what we do and how we behave in the home and with our community, actually it isn't everything. And then butting that up against the idea of the predominant culture in Christchurch at that time and thinking, this is actually what the world is like. And then thinking, hold on, but it's not like that in my house. So that also is not everything.
There you go.
So, I mean, it's only now talking to you that I'm probably realizing it, to be honest. But, awesome. That would have been maybe the first part of me realizing what is the supreme reality, if you will, of things? A lot of it is perception. A lot of it is what individuals think. A lot of it is based on your situation or your cultural lens or how you've been taught to do things. So what exists beyond that?
Yeah.
Something can either be a platform or a shackle, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can either be chained to something, like the idea of the world and how it works, and you're just all in on it, which means that you also need to protect it at all costs, be away from people that don't think like you, not hear things that you don't like, not absorb anything that could destroy your ideas, because your world is kind of propped up on it. Or you could accept that nothing is permanent, including how you look at things. And then you really start exploring, who is this Rob guy? That's when you start having those kind of conversations with yourself through talking to others, like how I'm talking to you.
Yeah. And what's been implicit in all of this last 10 minutes or so is the role of others. And you said you need people who are going to destroy your ideas. You need people who are going to engage in this level of conversation with you. How do you find them? How do you bring them into your world? Where do they come from?
I think everyone has the capacity to think and talk like this, and I feel like what I'm able to do is to put people at ease with it.
Yeah.
It's not really a, hey, trust me with what we're talking. It's not that type of offer. There's a little dash of, hey, nothing lasts forever, and, hey, do you really want to talk? Do you really want to talk?
Yeah.
The people that I want to have in my life, like my friends and not your family so much because they're party anyway and they're always going to be around. But, the people that you choose to be in your life who aren't your family, I don't need to know absolutely everything, but I need to know, where do you operate from? How do you feel about your family? How do you feel about injustice, so to speak? Even things like, how do you feel about football? You can tell a lot from someone by listening to how they think about things or how they do things. Watching someone make a sandwich, you can learn a lot from that. Do they just chuck the thing together? Or do they get a particular butter heated at a particular temperature with a particular bread? It tells you heaps.
This says a lot about who you are, that you observe those sorts of things. How many people would even think to go, how does this person operate? By observing them. That's powerful.
I find it fascinating. The other thing is, in terms of values, is you have to do that stuff with care, because really people are revealing themselves to you, and people tend to keep that stuff behind things. And the way you engage with them when that happens is, I'm not saying it's a recipe, but, operating from your values is how you do it, that you keep confidences, that you don't use this information to hurt them, that you're trying to get to a different level of understanding. This is not for my benefit. This is, all these kind of things, ideas, concepts, threats, whatever you want to call it, all of that stuff's wrapped up in how you meet the person where they are.
Mm.
It does take some trust around that, and sometimes there's pushback, and that's fine. Some people aren't ready for that, and that's all good with me. But you really have to show people that they protect it because they feel it's important. I also think it's that important.
Yeah, and show that you value that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me a bit about purpose. So we've known each other, we don't see each other very often, but there's been these lovely touch points in our history.
Mm.
And one of them was when you did the Changemakers program a few years ago now. And we have a thing in there called your big question. What's the big question that you're aligning your life efforts around, your work effort around, that may not be answered in your lifetime? What's the big question you're contributing to answer, right? And I know you did through that, and it wasn't only because of that program, but that was a part of the journey for you. There was a real clarity I saw emerge about what you're here to do. And you mentioned a bit about your work. Tell us a bit about the purpose behind what you do.
Pacific people, like my family also being one of them, one thing you heard growing up was the concept of, or the idea that New Zealand is the land of milk and honey. It is the place where all of your wishes and dreams and success and prosperity, that is where it will happen. That's why a lot of Samoans and islanders got sent here, yeah? Normally by their families, to succeed on their behalf and create a prosperous future for the next generation. What I experienced personally with my mum is my mum worked 2 or 3 jobs, cleaning, working at the Foundation for the Blind, putting herself through teachers' college. She goes through teachers' college. She goes through uni at the same time. She gets a double degree. She goes out in 1980s Christchurch to apply for a job, and she just keeps getting turned down for jobs, for roles. Constantly being told, I'm sorry, you're overqualified for this role. And I remember my mum would show me all of these letters, and I just remember feeling an intense sadness and fury about it. Firstly, because for me, it was apparently unjust, even though I was young. And the second thing is my mum, right? So of course you're going to be upset.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, so we come here, we go to their schools, we do all their stuff, we get qualified, and then they won't give us jobs. So what is the point of this?
Where's the milk and honey here?
Yeah. What is the point of that? That was probably the inception of it, along with everything else that I've described, my experience of growing up in that environment. And I remember my mother being very focused on success for Pacific people. So she was big on education. She comes from a family of teachers. Like at church, she was constantly talking to, my cousins, you should go to university. I can't go to university. Yeah, you can go to university. You've got a brain like every other person on the planet. You can go to university. And she'd just be constantly doing this work with our young people of our church, and I know loads of them now that are qualified, gone through uni, got good jobs, etc. I'm not saying that's because of mum, but mum cared enough to tell them, you have the ability like any other person to do this. And I think that success for Pacific people, it's something maybe not super clear at the beginning, but, quite clear at the moment. That driving success for Pacific people is a really important thing for me. I got told yesterday in a meeting, you're quite passionate about this, aren't you, Rob? And I just remember thinking, it's like the last word I have in my mind when I describe myself aiming or trying to live this purpose. And I think it's hard to see yourself from the outside sometimes. When you're in it, you don't know. Another reason for needing others, right? You need others, especially people you trust, who can tell you accurately what is happening. That
accuracy rather than the truth is the accuracy again, right?
Yeah.
I agree. Having people who shine a light or hold up a mirror to say, here's what I'm experiencing, here's what I'm seeing,
yeah,
I think is so important. You're right. It's so hard. I find it whether I'm trying to think about where I'm taking my work. In my head, it's a jumble, right? Clear vision, purpose, and strategy. Maybe in the soup there somewhere. But then I have people who have experienced me over time and consistent engagements with me. They will cut through and say, you're about this. This is what I see you're standing for. Here's where your superpowers lie.
Yeah.
And you don't need that many of them, I reckon. You want people who want the best for you and will be accurate with their language and their description. And it is gold because, it's like, I'm the genie in the bottle. I can't see myself in this bottle, but there is seeing me inside the bottle going, look at you go. I'm like, okay, good. And it gives me permission to A, keep going, and B, not be perfect.
Yeah.
I think they're seeing a better version of me than I may be seeing of myself, right?
That's absolutely it, I think. They're the people you really connect with, so they really know you. Like if there's a recording of you or something, it's like a handful of people that know you're nervous. Probably even less than that because they know you. They're like, oh, yeah, I saw you do the little, you recovered well. No one else saw that.
And they're doing it out of love, right? It's
Yeah,
it's not a critique. And most other people might notice it or not notice it, and who cares? right? In fact, it's
right.
interesting just metering what I just shared. I'm like, ooh, should I put that in the podcast that I don't have it all together? So of course.
What does it mean, Big B? What does it mean to have it all together? Is having it all together, does that mean that you've got every inch of your life planned out? For some people, it works and great. That's awesome. But for me, it's more around the values and whether I'm living them every day. It's what I always go back to, It's sometimes, how you can deliver something really clumsily? Sometimes, sometimes you'll say...
No, I don't know that at all,
Rob. But the values come through. Whenever I do that, that's my rewind on it. I'm just like, hold on, did I say it? Was the intent right and the energy right? All right, cool. Yep, can clean it up. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, actually, this podcast is that, right? I mean, I deliberately want it to be a real raw conversation, not an interview with preset questions, because I feel that's more engaging for anyone listening, right? It's more interesting because it's two humans having an exploratory conversation, and even saying exploratory came out kind of weird. Yeah, this is how we roll. It might feel like a slight left turn here, but I'm sure it's linked. You took the kids back to Samoa not long ago.
Yeah, we did.
Tell us what that experience was like.
That was quite an affecting experience. My mother took me to Samoa when I was 3, and that's it. So basically, I feel like really me and the boys and Lisa as well, we were all going for the first time. And it was really special to go with them. This is not an uncommon thing with immigrant families, right? It's that, family have come here for a better life. They had it like this, and, they didn't even have shoes, and everyone hears all those stories. The thing I learned from being at home, if I can call it that, in Samoa with the boys, and a very important thing the Buddha says is that you cannot pass on enlightenment. So I'm telling the boys before we go, they don't have much money. It's hard life in the village. Actually, I told them ever since they were young, right? You're lucky to have a fridge with food. You're lucky to have this stuff. But like the genie in the bottle, they don't know, right? It's the life that they've got. They have no comprehension of it. But when we went to my mother's village and to my auntie's house, and they're sitting there in this house, which is very unlike a house that they've ever lived in. I just remember watching their faces, like just this dawning of, wow, Grandma used to live here like this, and running water, and it's and you can just watch it kind of washing over them, and them slowly realizing, thank the Lord, Grandma came here to New Zealand. And it was interesting. For months before we went, they'd been complaining about all sorts of things. I don't like my room. I don't like the walls. I don't like my posters. That straight after we went to see my auntie, I remember us being in the car, and they were like, yeah, my room's pretty good, eh, Dad? And I think in addition to that, this really strong sense of belonging I was hearing from the boys that I hadn't heard from them before. In my mum's village, there's a monastery or a religious school, and at the back of it near the coast, there's like a cave, and it's got a pool. It's like a pool in a cave under a church.
Cool. Beautiful
swimming. They couldn't get enough of being in that water. And I just remember thinking, your grandmother's been in that water before, How amazing is that? Like she's swum in this pool. She's looked out at this ocean. That sense of connection and oneness. It's hard. I feel like I can't really do it any justice talking about it, but I remember being there and just it feeling so special.
Yeah.
And the boys, wherever we went in Samoa, I just remember them. They were just so content. Their faces in the ocean were just so content. I even remember our youngest one talking about, like, this is my water, eh, Dad? And goes, yes, yep, absolutely is.
Wow, that's a realization. How long ago was that?
Oh, that would have been last September.
Okay, so just over a year ago. What have you noticed has been the lasting effect either on you or on the kids?
I think for me, it's probably a full circle, a process in the grief, because my mother passed away in 2005. When we were flying away, when we left Samoa, I remember just thinking about how scared and lonely she would have felt being on this plane, going to a country she has no understanding what it's like on a massive mission to turn the dial for the family. And I just remember I did cry thinking about that. And also looking at her grandsons and just thinking, Far, you did pretty awesome, Mum. Like that is mission complete.
There's the legacy, right?
Yeah. And so for me, it was a sense of closure. That's probably what it gave me. And I think for the boys, because you know what children are like, sometimes the understanding or the wisdom doesn't come till way later. The thing that I noticed the most was that it was going in. And that's the most important thing. It was going in at the source, from the place, in the right way. So that'll sit within them, right? For them to interrogate as they go older, to bubble back up, to turn into curiosity. That's the gift of being in Samoa. That's the gift that they'll have.
There's something beautiful about what you're saying there. Coming back into quite a different context. I work in leadership development, and there's so much demand for send people on a course and expect immediate change as a result of that course, right? And just last week I was working with a group. We just finished a 6-month leadership development program, and we were talking about return on investment and all that stuff,
Yeah.
I found myself saying, the word I was using was, this is an equipping program, right?
Right. But
another way of putting it is exactly what you've just described. It's a planting the seeds of wisdom, of stuff that you may not see any tangible outward benefit for a little while, because this stuff takes time to germinate, and sometimes decades, and it will continue to have many different faces as life goes on, right? And again, I think there's something about the fast-paced and the now and get the right answer and all of this stuff that gets in the way of the real work, of the real work of growth and development. And your gift to your kids, we need more of that, I think, planting seeds.
Yeah, it definitely taught me, like I said, it really taught me a lot about, with the children anyway, and also in professional life, the way information is transmitted and the intent it is transmitted with is almost more important than the thing you're saying. Like I've heard other parents tell the boys things that I tell them like 1,000,000 times, right? Like 1,000,000 times. Why haven't you done this? How come you haven't cleaned that? I'm sure every parent of teenagers has said the same thing. But sometimes you're at someone's house and they ask them and it just gets done. And you're like, firstly, there's fury because why can't they do it for me?
Yeah.
The second thing is, how can I say it like that? And then the third thing is, sometimes the part out of your control is how that information is transmitted to the person so they get it. And you have to be happy that that process happens no matter who's involved. It doesn't matter who says it. If someone knows how to say it, awesome.
It's independent of you, or it can be.
Absolutely.
Rob, it feels like we're a place where we could at least pause this conversation.
Yep.
But no doubt we will keep having these over the months and years ahead. Is there anything that, in final words, around stuff we want to reiterate or explore slightly more, stuff that you maybe would have loved to have gone deeper into that you'd love to just touch on?
This always happens when we talk, Digby. Like honestly, I'm thinking about 20 different things that I could easily start talking about right now. If I try my best to reflect on what we've talked about, really acknowledging and accepting, it sounds so cliche, but, development and growth is a journey. And don't expect to get there. Plan to get there, but don't expect to get there. It's that spirit of continued curiosity and exploration. You always find there's another level. You get to a level, you plateau for a bit, might be for a while, but eventually you hit the start of the next level.
Yeah.
The only way that doesn't happen is you get a chair and you put it on that plateau and you stay there.
Yep.
And you have to be quite intentional in doing that. That's my experience. Sometimes you feel like walking, sometimes you feel like running. Yeah, just as long as you're moving.
Long as you're moving.
Yeah, as long as you're moving and you know there's always another level, you're going to continue to develop and grow yourself. That's kind of what I've reflected on our conversation and, in terms of the last few years for me.
Man, you have a way with words. I think I'll be reflecting on so many of these ideas. It's awesome. Man, I wish we talk more often. It is so good. It's just sort of like this, I don't know, I'm just soaking in it right now. It's fabulous. So thank you.
Oh, no worries. It's nice to have one recorded, isn't it?
It's good to have one recorded.
Yeah,
Maybe there's going to be another one, I think, down the track. If people wanted to connect with you directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
By email is maybe the best way.
Or maybe LinkedIn.
Oh, I forgot I was on there. Yes.
There you go. So if you get hold of Rob on LinkedIn, maybe don't expect an immediate reply.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is CO2 on LinkedIn as well.
Yes. Yeah. It took me a while. I remember trying to look you up on LinkedIn a while back, and I didn't know about the CO2. It's like, oh, okay. So there's full circle for us. Rob, thanks so much, my friend. It's been something for all of us just to reflect on. I love that you've got some reminders, some learning for yourself out of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon.
Always a great convo, Doopy. Thanks very much for the opportunity, mate. Appreciate it.
When I introduced Rob, I described him as someone who has a strong sense of who he is, yet a deep curiosity to keep learning and growing. Did that come through in the conversation? Did you notice that? I certainly did. I thought he really lives that combination. And there's a couple of really powerful ideas, plenty of ideas, a couple I just thought I'd reflect on. The first one is this idea of allowing your idea to be destroyed. What if we could operate that way a bit more often, not hold on so tightly to our idea being the idea and it having to be right? What if we could say, actually, I don't mind if it gets ripped to shreds because it's going to make progress better. And I think if I can get out of my own way, I certainly know, I think this is why I've paid attention to it. If I often think, oh yeah, this is a great idea. And if I put it out there and it gets ripped to shreds, I'm a bad person. I've got to dissociate me from the ideas. So there's something for me to think about there. The other one is about having people around you. And there's people who back you and lift you and encourage you. And then there's people who challenge you. And they're both really important ideas, having these two sets of people. I reckon you want to invite all sorts into your life, the ones who can just help you be a bit bigger, as Rob does for me. What's this got you thinking? There's a lot of gold here, and I reckon you might want to re-listen to this, maybe once or twice, and just to see what nuggets you find there, and then perhaps share those nuggets, those ideas with a couple other people, have some conversations about it. One other resource you might want to jump into is episode 1 with Callum McCurdy, where he and I talk about the idea of feedback that Rob and I also explored, the challenge and the fear we have around getting feedback either on ourselves or our ideas. A lovely complementary episode to this one, I reckon. I'd also love it if you could give this episode a review on your podcast app or the overall podcast and tell us what you think. And the more that I get feedback on it, the more I can improve it and the more I can share it. For now, this is Dig Deeper. I'm Digby Scott. And until next time, go well.